and provide, nope, make you a co-host. That's what I'm looking for. All right. Now you should be able to share. Go ahead.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and share my. And it always goes on the wrong screen first, so hold on. There we go. Can everyone see everything
Yep.
all right?
Yep.
Great.
Again.
All right, well, thanks for having me today. It is really nice to be able to present to you guys. My name is Christine Seifert, and I'm one of the co-owners of MRC Global, and we are a regulatory consulting group that's located in Memphis, and we do consulting for regulatory submissions and quality systems, mostly related to medical devices. We do a little bit with tissue and biologics as well, and some combination products, but mostly focused on regulatory. And our main focus would be that if it has to do with FDA, that's pretty much in the focus that we've got when it comes to the U.S. That is going to be the primary focus of what I talk about tonight. But in addition to that, I will talk a little bit about international requirements and some of the things that are required in markets outside the US as well. A little bit about myself. I actually started out with a physics degree, didn't really know what to do with that. So I went and got a master's degree of biomedical engineering from the University of Iowa. From there, started working and worked at Medtronic for a number of years, and got a master's of engineering management at CBU while I was there. And about 11 years ago, started up what started as a different name for a consulting company, and that is migrated into MRC Global. And at this point, we've got a team of 8 employees and another set of subcontractors, and do work pretty much globally. We've got clients a lot in the US, some in the Memphis area, but all over the US, and also some in a lot of different markets, Asia, Europe. So it's a lot of fun. We even have somebody that's in Australia as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. Hopefully, this will be helpful to you guys, but uh, the focus of this presentation is really kind of looking at, from the perspective of a business, what is it that regulatory and quality does for you, and what is it that they, should be consulted about. And, when it really comes down to medical devices and such a regulated industry, you need to make sure that you're considering, these things up front. A lot of people, really want to push all of us off to the very end because they don't want to deal with all the things that go on. But if you do that, unfortunately, you're still going to have to do it, and then you're really focused on, losing time and money because you're towards the end of your project. I did laugh for a second when you said you thought this was going to be interesting tonight. Most people have to keep themselves awake with coffee when they're listening to things about regulatory affairs. So hopefully I can make it at least a little bit interesting. But this is the list of things that I'll be going over today, kind of talking through the strategy, the pathways, classifications, and then some of the regulatory and quality system requirements. So when you first start out, everyone's just, super excited about their widget or gadget or whatever it is. But from a regulatory standpoint, what we're trying to figure out is, what bucket do you fall into? FDA is a big government body, and they oversee a lot of things. But as far as your product specifically, would you be considered a drug, a device, software, cosmetic, tissue, cell? You've got to figure out which area of FDA or what government body you're going to be working with. And then within that, even the product is one part of it, but FDA actually considers that to be only a piece of it. They really consider how it's intended to be used and the labeling that you're going to be having with it to be a equally important portion of it. So, you have to know, like, what part of the body, what diagnosis, what treatment are you going to be doing, and making sure that you're also presenting all of that to FDA at the same time. What data do you need to provide to FDA? And then, all of that is going to impact the time and money that it takes for you to get to market and how long that's going to be. So the other thing to consider if you're a company is what is your end goal? Are you looking to become a manufacturer and physically manufacture the product? Are you really looking to just design it and have somebody else manufacture it? Do you want to be the legal entity that owns it, or are you wanting to sell the rights to someone else and let them market it? What is it that your ultimate goal is? Because that also is going to impact the time and money that you have to spend, and then also the amount of involvement that you have to have with the product once it gets on the market. All right, I'm not going to read through all these definitions completely, but this is kind of like what you have to look at. These are the definitions from the FDA's website as far as what a drug and a device and a biologic is. And when it comes to devices, the key kind of terms in here is what I have in gray, which is, are you creating something that's going to cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent some sort of a disease? That's what they're looking for when they're looking to see if something would be considered part of a definition that meets the classification of a device. All right, like I said, intended use and indications are equally as important. So intended use is what is the general purpose of the device and kind of what is it going to be used for, and then the indications for use are, what is the disease or what is the target population that you're actually focusing on. All right, and then, in addition to talking about the specific indications and what you're going to diagnose, you also have to consider at this point in time what other marketing or clinical claims you might want to make. So in this example that we have up here, diagnosis of strep A is your indication, but if you want to be able to make claims that say that you're 10% more sensitive, have sensitivity of 10% more than other diagnostic devices out there, do you have data that says that? Do you have clinical data that says that? You need to put that into your submission and let FDA review that and make sure that they agree that you're able to substantiate that claim. So there's a whole strategy around the data that you're needing to have beyond what even FDA requires. And then labeling, a lot of people say, okay, well, there's, the label that's on the product, that's what we're, held to. But, pretty much anything that has the product on it and that is out in commercial distribution is considered labeling. So you have the label on the product, but you also have that sheet that's always really big, lots of words on it that everyone throws away. If you think about like a pill bottle that has that in there. That's the instructions for use. FDA spends hours reviewing that and giving edits to the companies. Surgical techniques, instruction manuals, there's all sorts of documents, even websites. And FDA needs to make sure in their mind that you're consistent across all of those with what they cleared you for the clearance of your device. If you don't do that, you're considered to be off-label promotion, and they can come in and they can actually have findings against you for that. All right, so when you talk about classification, FDA has a whole classification system, and when they go through, there's low class and there's high class devices that are based on risk categories. So we have an example up here just because it's interesting sometimes to see that like even toothbrushes are considered devices. They're class 1, meaning that they're very low risk. But there are certain requirements around toothbrushes that have to be met to be able to put that product into commercial distribution. So classifications for FDA are class 1, 2, and 3. Class 1, like I said, very low risk. Class 2 is a little bit higher risk, could be implants or instruments. But there are things that would be similar to something that's currently on the market. And then your class 3 devices are things that are very new or novel or just very high risk devices, like pacemakers would fit into that category. So when you think of different examples of these, like screwdrivers, for example, would be one example of a class 1 device. And yes, this is the same type of screwdriver that you're used to seeing that you'd go get at a hardware store. But there's screws that are involved in, when you look here, you've got spinal implant systems, for example. Those would be class 1 low risk devices, whereas the spinal implants themselves would be considered class 2, and they would be a little bit higher risk, but they wouldn't be as higher risk as these class 3 devices like pacemakers. And what you'll see here is that we have kind of the cost associated. Class 1 devices do not require a submission to FDA, just a registration. So it's about $5,000 per year. A spinal implant system, depending on if you're a small business or not, it's between $3,000 and $12,000 to do the submission to FDA, and then you still have to register with the $5,000. Things like pacemakers and things like that. I mean, now your fees get much, much higher. And so, that cost and time to market is growing as you get into the higher risk different categories. All right, so to talk a little bit about the different types of submissions that can go into FDA, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on all of them, but the first one that's up here is if you're not sure about the classification that I was just showing you about, you can actually do a submission to them called a request for designation and ask them to assist you in classifying your device. The regulations went into place in 1976. And so, at that point in time, if you can think, there were a lot of things that were not even thought of yet, right? So, the technology that's out there today, the data that we can capture. So if there are classifications and different things that don't fit into current buckets, that's where this de novo classification comes into play, where you can actually go in and you can help to determine what that classification might be and what the requirements might be behind that. Now, that's going to be a little bit more of an intense submission process to FDA, but you can assist with putting something together. The one that I think is interesting right now is Apple Watches. That's actually not a device at all. If you're buying it for general use, everyone has them these days. But they are coming out with a lot of different apps and different things that you can put on there, or even attach to either a phone or a watch that might take blood pressure or might take different readings, which actually turn them into a device. And so there's different classifications for things like that they didn't even have to consider in 1976, obviously. So there's a lot of new technology out there today. All right, just to kind of touch real quickly, like I said, FDA class 1, 2, and 3. But every country or region has their own governing body. And so when you're doing submissions, it's not just a one, submission gets everything. You for each market. So you'll see here, European Union, Canada, Australia, they each have their governing bodies. Most of them have 4 different classes that they abide by, but you have to determine what your classification is in each of those markets when you're doing submissions. All right, so class 1 devices. The advantage of a class 1 device is that it usually is lower risk and lower requirements. And so there is no submission that has to go into FDA for them to review on the front side. You register your company and you put all the appropriate documentation in place to support that product. So you still have to have what's called a quality system to show that you have good control over that device and you can manufacture it consistently. But the requirements as far as the documentation are less, and you do not have to do the submission to FDA. Now, when you get into class 2 devices, this is where you do have to do a submission to FDA. And what you're basically showing is that the term that FDA uses is that you're substantially equivalent to something else that's currently on the market that's been cleared by FDA. FDA actually has a website that's really, really good, and you can go in and you can look up all the clearances that they've been received, and you can look up what similar classifications are for the different types of products that you might be using. And you compare to those products, and you have to establish that you are equivalent to them in design and testing and your labeling. And then you go through and you do a submission. The submission is a 510K, and there's a few different types of submissions. But if you're a brand new company, you're going to go in, you're going to do what's called a traditional 510K. People look that up and they say, okay, that has a 90-day active review time. So I'm going to get a clearance in 3 months. And that's true as far as the review time that FDA has, but the clock stops anytime they ask questions or when they're logging it into their system or things like that. So really, it's somewhere between a 4 and a 6 month time frame usually, although it can last longer depending on how long the company takes to respond to questions. Once you have submissions in with FDA and you've received clearance for certain products, if you're just making some small modifications to that product, then you can do what's called a special 510K with a shorter review time. But there's a smaller range of things that can go in underneath those submissions. Won't list out all these here, but this is just kind of a listing of the types of documentation that are required for a 510K. There's a lot of standardized forms that FDA has, but the primary components that you'd expect to see in those submissions, are descriptions of the product, your drawings or specifications, your labeling, like I said, the package insert and your physical labels. And then obviously the other big thing is here is all your supporting data, your mechanical testing. If you do have to do any studies, you would put those in there, and then any sort of validations that you might have related to whether it's biocompatible to be used in the body and sterilization and things like that. So then FDA goes through and they review all those pieces of data. They make sure you have all the sections that you need. And then if they ask you for additional information, the clock stops and you have 180 days to respond. Once you respond, the clock starts back up again. And at the end of it, you basically have three options. One is, and what you hope for is that you get a substantially equivalent decision, which is an SE decision letter. The other thing that you could get is a NSE, which is a not substantially equivalent letter, and that means that you are not cleared to put that product onto the market. And then the other thing that happens sometimes, if you can't respond fast enough, or if you just decide that you want to withdraw the submission, you can withdraw, and then if you are wanting to resubmit at some point, you have to start over again. You'd have to pay a new user fee, and you'd have to submit all the documents again to FDA. So once you have some clearances and you have some products that you've gotten through FDA, there is a pathway for some very, very small changes that you can go through. Like if you had sizes 1, 3, and 5, and you wanted to add sizes 2 and 4, you can actually do that as internal documentation within your files, and you do not have to go to FDA for that. There's some flow charts out there that kind of describe what those changes might be. And like I said, there's actually databases on the FDA site that goes through, and you can look up product clearances. You can look at the companies that are registered with FDA. You can look up the different product codes and the types of products that are classified. There's all sorts of things that you can look up if you're wanting to do research to see what other types of things are currently out there or what your classification might be. All right, so that's class 2 devices. Now, if you move up another step and you're looking at something that's probably a class 3 device, now you're looking at something that is most likely going to require clinical data. Before you can do any sort of a study for something that's considered a class 3 device on humans to do trials, you have to do what's called an investigational device exemption, or an IDE. This is where you submit to FDA and you submit your protocol and the data that you have currently. And you ask for them to approve for you to do a study where you're looking to do trials with clinical study. It's a 30-day review clock. Once again, there's going to be questions back and forth, and if it's approved, they give you that approval, and then you can start a study where you'd go through the review boards, the IRBs at the hospitals, and you'd have a lot of oversight. Those studies, usually take at least a year. I mean, they can take up to 5, 6, 7 years. If you get into the drug world, I mean, sometimes those studies can take 10 plus years to go through the different levels of scrutiny that you need to go through. Once you finally get that clinical data done and you have all the data that you need, now you can go through and do, it's similar to a 510K, except it's called a PMA, a pre-market approval. And it's much more extensive than what would be in a 510K. So now you have all the same things that you would put into that submission, but now you're going to add all that clinical data that you've collected, but you also have to put in a lot more detail related to your manufacturing processes, your quality systems, your design control. You have to just include a lot more information, where I'd say a 510K is, a couple hundred pages, maybe 500 pages, somewhere in there. You're looking at thousands and thousands of pages when you're submitting something for a PMA. Luckily, in today's world, you can submit those electronically. You send them in what's called an e-copy for them to review, as opposed to having to send hard copies, which you had to do at one time. So you go and you submit that, and they go through and they review all that information. In this case, there's actually a 180-day clock on it. But once again, I mean, you're looking at probably 9 months to a year and a half before you get approval. And sometimes it can take much longer than that. And a lot of times the FDA actually asks to put together, if you've ever heard of panel meetings or advisory panels, where they have surgeons and industry representatives and other people that can ask the company questions. They can go through and they can either approve or they can, deny the PMA request and whether you can put it on the market or not. The other big difference with a PMA as opposed to a 510K or Class 1 instruments is that you have obligations after you actually get the product on the market. So for a PMA, you also have to do what's called annual reports. You have to continue to keep up with the patients and the follow-up that they've got. You need to do supplements when you're making pretty much any sort of change to that product or the labeling. You have to keep up with any adverse events or anything that happened with the patient. So there's a number of things that you have to do that would be, just to make sure that you're, having a safe and effective product on the market. So something else that FDA has put in place, it's been a number of years now, but a little bit more recently, is they allow what's called a pre-submission or a Q submission, where you can go in. This is a submission to FDA where you're really, in most cases, sending in a protocol. It might be mechanical testing, animal studies, some clinical protocols, where you're asking for feedback. Obviously, if you're going to spend a lot of money on those things, you want to make sure that you're setting things up correctly to make sure you're testing your product adequately. So you can submit that within 75 to 90 days. You can request, and you can either get email feedback, teleconference, or days before COVID, you could get face-to-face meetings. Now, mostly it's teleconferences, but you can ask to get that feedback from them, and there's no user fee involved in that to get that feedback from them. One other note, I'm focusing mostly on what you do for medical devices, but there are combination products as well where a device might be combined with something else. Drug-coated stent is an example of this. And what happens there is that the stent itself has got what they call the primary mode of action. So the device group would do the primary review on that. But the drug department would have a reviewer that would also be part of that review process. So, there's a little bit more of an extensive review. When you're going through these submissions, there's all sorts of things that you have to consider, making sure you keep all the correspondence, that you're, making sure that you are considering everything that's happened in history with the submissions. If you've had other submissions before, you have to look at competitive devices and the clearances they've had, or even the issues that they've had in literature, to make sure that you're not bringing up something that might be something that FDA has a concern about. And, the other thing from a company standpoint that you obviously have to consider is, what testing do I need to do? Mechanical testing is the big one, but you also have to look at biocompatibility testing, any sort of electrical testing, if it's an electrical type of device, software validations, human factors or usability testing, especially for home use devices, sterilization validations, packaging validations. FDA is going to be asking questions or wanting to see evidence of all these things, depending on the type of product you have. And then, even once you get those clearances or approvals, like I said, you also have to register with FDA. You have to do device listings. You have to annually update that registration. And the main reason for this is that this actually makes FDA aware that you're selling products. You are confirming to them that you have the appropriate things in place to sell your product. And then they, at some point in time, will come out and audit you and do some sort of an audit to make sure you have everything in place. It could happen right away, or it could happen, 2, 3, 4 years down the road. You're never sure quite when FDA is going to come. Usually they let you know before they get to your facility, though. So now that you know all that, what are you going to communicate if you're talking to investors or partners? It's important to know your regulatory plan and for them to understand what it's going to take for you to get to market. Do you know your patient population? Are you going to do some sort of a tiered strategy to make you, do simple first, and then maybe you expand what you're going to do? You want to know the time and money. And you also need to find out if you're going to get reimbursed for that. So the reimbursement is one of the other things. Do you want me to answer questions now, or do you want me to wait till the end?
If people have questions and you're willing to take them and do them now, if it's context to what you're talking about, it's up to you. You can wait.
Yeah, if you, someone that I think I see someone's hands right. If you want to go ahead and ask your question while I've got the slide up, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Christine, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Brad from Crossroads. Good to see you again.
Oh, hey, how are you? Yeah.
Yeah. Just a quick question. I heard that they actually lowered the cost for small businesses for like submissions now. It's like $3,100 or something like that. Is that true?
Well, so the answer is there is a lower cost for small businesses to do submissions, but they've always had that provision. It's just that there's actually a bigger gap now between like standard companies and the small businesses. But If you are going to do that, you have to apply for a small business designation. So each year you have to apply for that and meet certain criteria. But you're right. Like for a 510K, for example, it's about $3,100 this year. And for like a large company that would pay the standard fee, it's about $12,000. So, I mean, that's a significant difference.
So that kind of applies to all of us, I guess. What are the guidelines for small business designation?
You know, I can send it out to you guys. There's a whole criteria that's listed. The primary thing is that you have to be under a certain dollar amount for the year. I think it's, don't quote me, like it's like $100 million or something like that. You have to be under to be able to meet the criteria. It's I mean, the number is pretty high.
Gotcha. Okay, well, thanks.
Yeah. All right. So some of the people that come to me ask me, you know, so when do I talk to FDA? So you're telling me I can do a pre-submission, you're telling me I can go in and do these other submissions, like, you know, what is the right timing to do certain things? And the answer to that, as most people will laugh about with the regulatory person, is it depends. For very simple devices, it probably makes the most sense. The pathway is pretty clear. You can go straight to a submission and send in your 510K or do whatever you're wanting to do without getting some feedback first. If you have something that's a little bit more complex, or it's a class 3 device where you might need to do animal or clinical studies, I always recommend doing some sort of a pre-submission or review of those protocols ahead of time, because you don't want to do and spend all that time and money and then find out that you know, it didn't meet the FDA's requirements. So having a good relationship with FDA and talking to them ahead of time is always a good thing. So, you know, as early as possible, you want to think about that and make sure that you've got your strategy all planned out. You know, you want to try to be as prescriptive, though, in what you're giving FDA as you can. You don't want to leave them open-ended questions, because they're probably going to come back and ask you for a lot of things that they'd like you to do. You know, you just want to say, hey, the testing that I proposed, is this an adequate sample size, acceptance criteria in this, to make sure that they're giving you that directed feedback that you're looking for. All right, and then I know that I'm getting close to the end of my time here, but I'm going to just spend a couple minutes on what I keep talking about, which is the quality system requirements, to make sure that everyone knows that in addition to those submissions that I'm talking about that you have to go do, you have to put procedures in place at the company to make sure that you do have the right processes there. So you know, there's, like I said, the medical device industry is very regulated. The company itself has to have all of these procedures in place: management, you know, controls, audit procedures, your document control, purchasing, supplier control, you know, labeling, you know, all these things have to have very defined processes around them to ensure that you've got good control over your process and your product. But more specifically, and kind of on target probably for what you guys are looking at, you know, in the earlier stages, there's a process called design controls. And, you know, the references I have here, 21 CFR Part 820, those are the requirements for the FDA for the quality system, and 0.30 is the design control process. ISO 1345 is more the international requirement for quality system in general, and there's also requirements in there related to design controls. And what you see in front of you right now, you know, you need to have a very controlled process so that they know that you've gone through and you've designed, you know, your user needs, that you've, you know, planned for what your outputs are going to be, what your design is going to look like. You've done verification testing, validation, you know, cadaver labs and things to make sure that it meets the user needs. And that you've gone through and you have this file. And this is actually one of the big things that they will definitely audit if they came and audited your facility, as well, to put these documentation files in place pretty well. And inside of there, it's the product, but it's also everything that you might do. So packaging, labeling, sterilization. I mean, all the things that you're going to have as part of that product overall need to be covered in that design history file. You have to have implants and instruments covered. Instruments do have lesser controls and in some cases are exempt from design controls, but you need to make sure that the way that they interact with the implants are covered. And then you need to have change control over the product life cycle. So if you change that design, you need to make sure you've got good records of all of that. And then within that design history file, you'd also have what's called a risk management file. Risk management file encompasses, a lot of different components, like I'm flashing up on the screen. The main thing here is that you've reduced the amount of risk associated with the product. Like what could break and what have you done to make sure that that is not going to happen in most cases. Obviously, you've got to reduce as far as you possibly can. And then I always laugh because I always stick this slide up here last just to, kind of stick the the fear in everyone before I get done. People say, well, you said FDA may not come for 4 years. Like, what's the reason to put all this stuff in place and do all this? The main thing is that obviously it's the law, but it's also, here are the things that can happen if they do come and audit you, or if they, look at things and they find something out in the field, or if you have a product problem, they can send you what's called untitled letters, meaning that they want you to fix something and you're required to reply back to them. They can send warning letters to you. The problem and the issue with warning letters is that they actually post those on their website, so they become public documents, so your competitors can see those. And then you can see all the way down, consent decrees, seizure, recalls of product. It doesn't happen often, but I mean, there can be criminal prosecution where you'll, every now and then you'll see, usually it's the leadership of a company. But this is like in just highly egregious situations where they're disregarding things completely. So, but anyway, you just, it's much easier to keep up with things from the beginning than it is to try to fix it and go through something like this. So anyway, that is the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any other questions anyone might have at this time as well. I've either put everyone to sleep or I answered all their questions.
I'm sure that's not the case. You didn't put me to sleep. And this is the group that you probably would be the best one for them to talk to, because they all are dealing with regulatory opportunities in front of them. So it's a good group.
I'll ask a general question, just based off of just terminology. This is Erica. Yeah. So if you're creating a device that you think needs 510K clearance, so there's clearance terminology and then there's approval terminology, right? Yep. So if I'm thinking of 510K clearance, am I basing my can my predicate device be something that was also just cleared through 510K, or does it have to be a predicate device that was approved as a?
Nope. So you're right. So the difference is you can only say your device is approved if you actually go through the PMA process, because FDA considers that they have gone through clinical data, all your manufacturing, they've been on site to audit. So they actually do consider that to approve you and your device to be on the market. For a 510K, they call that a 510K clearance, because while they do review things, an extensive amount of detail as far as the testing and everything else, they are not coming in to audit you at that point, and they are not looking at your quality system. So they're basically saying, we are clearing you to say that you are substantially equivalent to something else. And so because of that, to your question, when you do a 510K, it is against other 510K products that have currently been cleared. So it would be against other cleared products.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, Brad.
Another question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you mentioned your example of the Apple Watch and how the watch itself didn't have clearance, but the app for it needed to have clearance, I'm assuming that's just a matter of the claims that the app's making versus the claims that the device is making.
Yeah, in the case of apps, it's usually the claims that the app is making, but the app itself, before it should put itself out there, would have to have that clearance from FDA. There's actually a guidance document that FDA has put out there specific to apps these days, because there's been so many. And if apps are just presenting data, then that would not put it into the scope of a medical device. But if it's analyzing or doing something where it's giving you an output or a potential diagnosis, or speaking with your surgeon or doctor at that point, then that's usually where you're crossing the line into something that would be a device. The other things that outside of apps that would be in that same kind of bucket would be there are some things that may be attached to your phone, or so it might be a not an app, but it would actually be a device. and it would attach to your phone and have an app associated with it. And so those things might be considered medical devices as well.
But in the case of those like app-like devices, does the app by itself get regulated, or does the app with the device have to go through the process?
It would be that combination of
Okay,
the app
alright,
and the device. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Brad, you had another question, I think.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
So I had one question that's hardware and another that's software. The hardware question, I guess I'm trying to think for our IP, and I've never done this before with a submission, but on the 510K and indications that you list, if you have a lot of different various, I guess, market paths you can go and different market segments, I guess, that you could dive into with various indications that may not, kind of line up. Typically, I see like 510K submissions that are very specific for like a couple indications for like one market segment. Have you seen some that like have a lot of info that are packed trying to save money with like a lot of market segments, a lot of indications for use that are like not all correlated?
Yes and no. So it depends. So one thing to keep in mind is that the way that FDA is divided is by different branches. So like there's the orthopedic branch and there's the neuro branch and things like that. And so you have to submit to the branch that is associated with the indications you're asking for. So as long as those indications could all be reviewed by that same branch of FDA, you can bundle and put things together like that. Now, if you were crossing branches, then they may or may not let you do that because they probably want you to submit each of those individually to those individual branches where they have more of the expertise. Now, within that branch,
Where can I find those branches?
I'm sorry, what?
I said, is there a list on the FDA website somewhere of those different branches you're referring to?
Yeah, if you go on the FDA website, there's all sorts of information. They definitely have the different branches. They have a directory for the different people that work there, and they do. I mean, somewhere on there too. They have some work charts and even some breakdown of different things. So you can actually find a lot of information, associated with the different branches that are out there. But within the same branch, even the only other thing you have to remember is that you do have to be consistent with your predicate devices. So if there's nothing else that has that indication, you're going to either have to provide additional clinical data or literature to support that. And it's possible that if there's not supporting data for that they might kick you to like a PMA. So that's the other consideration for a 510K and why some people don't put in too many indications.
I get it now. I get it.
Yep.
That was a hardware question. The software question, I think I heard you say, I just wanted to, I guess, correct my thinking if I'm wrong, but if the software is only collecting information, it's outside of the FDA's, I guess, regulations. But if it's interacting with the doctor, if it's giving a prediction or a diagnosis or like interacting somehow, then it does. Is that right?
That's a pretty good guideline to use. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. Well, are there any more? We got time for maybe one last question.
I'll ask a question.
Go ahead,
This is Erica. So just in terms of the pre-submission process, you mentioned that that there is a strategy to maybe have your information looked at prior to doing the final submission, right?
Yep.
Has there been any information that shows that those companies that actually do the pre-submission process have a higher likelihood of actually being approved or cleared? Does that increase chances, or what do you think?
I think FDA actually does have some data. They do track metrics for things like that, and I think they do have some data associated with that. I don't know that I can point to anything that's solid, but I will tell you that the ones that I've been involved in where it is a more complex submission, I can definitely say that in my experience that it's been extremely helpful, and it's guided them to make sure that they're doing the appropriate testing and getting them through then the next step during the submission more efficiently.
You said it wasn't a cost.
Go ahead.
You said there wasn't a cost associated with it, but how long does it typically take for that to for you to get a response from a pre-submission?
Yep, it's 75 to 90 days.
Okay.
And actually, and I will say there's actually different timelines associated with different types of pre-submissions. There's actually some that can be done like during a submission if you have questions that come to you that require you to do some additional testing while you're in the middle of a review process. They actually will commit to getting back to you within 21 days if you do a pre-submission to review a protocol, because they know that you're under the clock of having to respond within 180 days. So depending on what you're doing, the timeframes might vary a little bit. So there's actually a guidance document, again, that FDA has that outlines the different types of pre-submissions and what those timeframes are.
Gotcha.
But the other big thing on complex submissions that pre-submissions help with is that they now know you and your product, and they can, having that relationship can definitely help facilitate getting you through a little bit faster.
Nice. Thank you.
All right. I think Brad has one more question.
Yeah, last question. So the fastest, I guess I'm aware of, if you qualify for it, is the 30-day special submission, right? There's nothing faster than that.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
unless you can do something as internal documentation. I mean, obviously, but
Letter to file.
that's a letter to file. Yep.
Okay.
But as far as a 510K, the 30-day submission for a 510K is the shortest time frame for a review.
All right. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much, Christine, for your presentation. I think we all found it very interesting, obviously, from judging from the questions and everything else. I mean, everybody was interested because it's contextual to what they're doing.
Good.
So I really appreciate your time. Let's give Christine a round of applause and say thank you. It can be virtual applause or real applause.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me to come. It was good.
Yeah, no, it was our pleasure, and you'll be plugged into many more sessions as we move forward. So we really appreciate it.
All right. Well, good luck to everyone, and we'll talk sometime soon.
Great. Thanks, Christine. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, Brad, you still have your hand up? You have a question still, or are you good?
I'm good. Sorry.
No, that's all right. It's all right. Just want to make sure we covered it. All right. So let's get to the rest of the session. Pull up my screen here to share. It's always the case. It's on the, just like Christine said, it's on the wrong monitor. Okay. Wow. Hang on a second, everybody. Okay. Does everybody see the Memphis Scipreneur Challenge first slide? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we'll get started. So what we need to get through is just, a few slides that we had earlier, just FDA regulatory regulations, MRC Global, they did a fantastic job. And tonight, what we're really going to talk about mostly is intellectual property. And then also value propositions and a few other topics. Okay, so with that, let's just jump right in. The basic definition of intellectual property is any work or invention that is a result of creativity, such as technology, manuscripts, design, whatever it is, which one has rights and for which one may apply for a patent, copyright, trademark, etc. There are lots of different things that make up intellectual property, but in essence, it's whatever you create or whatever your team creates. that's not otherwise already known globally, locally, regionally. So something that doesn't already exist, something that someone doesn't already have some protections on. So it has to be unique, and it has to be of your own creation. That's what your intellectual property is. Every single person on this call right now has some sort of level of intellectual property, whether that's knowledge that they've learned and gained and gleaned over the years that have formed opinions, or solutions to problems or answers to problems. Those are your intellectual property. The content that I create for these courses and the courses at CBU are my intellectual property, Shelby's intellectual property. It's based off of experience and industry standards and a lot of other widely available information, but the way I put it together and the way I teach it is my intellectual property. And so that's a good example of that. So let's go through a few examples, because we're going to talk about a few examples and we're also going to talk about a few levels of protection for those. So other types of intellectual property that I didn't mention: brands, logos, marks, descriptors, your taglines, just do it from Nike or have it your way from Burger King. Not just the Burger King and the BK and the guy who walks around with the King outfit on and the big bobbly head. Those are all brand marks, descriptors, taglines, logos, and everything else that each have their own level of protection. And we'll talk about those levels in those areas here in a minute. But those are all intellectual property. Someone at Burger King or someone commissioned by Burger King created those elements, and now Burger King owns those elements. Same with any brand that you have on the clothes on your person right now, or the computer that you're using, or anything behind you, the books that are behind you in a shelf. Those are all intellectual property from the creators that created those, and the brands and everything else from the manufacturers that manufacture those. Certainly technology, hardware and or software. So anything that's tangible or non-tangible related to technology is intellectual property, or could be intellectual property. Trade secrets, and we'll talk about that and elaborate that in a second, but these are things that are known only to you or only to your business, that if they were to get out, would be a bad thing. So these are proprietary and confidential information. And another example is just client price lists, just general information, like I said, that are trade secrets or information that should only be privy to individuals that are a part of an organization or have access to that intellectual property itself. So I think everyone kind of understands what intellectual property could be. And pretty much you can look around your room and see anything that you didn't create from scratch and almost consider that to be intellectual property of someone. So what are the varying levels of protections for intellectual property? Well, we have trademarks, copyrights, patents, and a couple of other ones: trade dress, which I'll explain, which most people probably haven't heard of, and trade secrets, which we just discussed a few moments ago. So when we're talking about intellectual property protections, we've talked about a few other terms in previous classes and sessions, and I utilize a term and my colleagues utilize a term called a moat. We've all heard of that word before as well. Any kind of middle-aged kind of show that you watch, or the Game of Thrones or Monty Python, they all have castles, and around those castles are moats. Those moats are an element of protection between the general population outside the castle and the castle walls themselves, to make it difficult for anyone to breach the castle. It's the same concept of what we're talking about here. What you're trying to do is build a moat around your business. So we talk about competitive advantage and how to outwit, outlast, outplay your competitors. A big part of that is going to be how you protect your intellectual property. That is going to keep you not necessarily away from legal situations, because you'll have challenges to that intellectual property many times, or you could, or you'll have to challenge other people on intellectual property when they infringe. But intellectual property is something that must be protected, and that is a key component of your business and provides a lot of value to your business as well. Companies like Motorola, which have hundreds and hundreds of patents, IBM, hundreds and hundreds of patents, Microsoft, Apple, and some of these patents are utilized by other technology platforms, but they pay a royalty to the inventor, in this case, Apple, or in the case of Microsoft or Motorola or any one of these technologies. So the intellectual property is not only something that will protect you from competition, but it also could be something that generates revenue, as well revenue sharing, but as well as acquisition. A lot of companies will be bought. In fact, Motorola at times has been bought for this reason. Nokia was bought for this reason, for not only their technology, but the handful of patents that they have that might be a barrier for another company to enter into a market in a much bigger fashion. So when Microsoft wants to enter into the handset market and get rid of their old mobile phones, they went to Nokia because they wanted to buy that customer base, they wanted to buy that technology, and most importantly, they wanted to buy those Android-based patents that their phone set, their handset had. So that was something that, all came about, or mostly came about, because of the technology and intellectual property that the company of Nokia actually owned, that Microsoft was highly interested in taking. In fact, they spun off Nokia later without those patents. They kept those patents for themselves. And so that's how patents and other things like trademarks, copyrights, and these other things to protect your intellectual property can be very, very important, and even make you money or make you a point of acquisition for an exit strategy, which is always a good thing. And a lot of the technologies that we're talking about today and in this space are ones that you will be working on in the future. Those are always kind of primed for being acquisition targets, specifically for the technology, but also generally for the customer base and the network of customers that you may have. All right, so let's break these down a little bit further. So trademarks, I mean, we talked about this a few slides ago. These are words, slogans, phrases, symbols, designs, color patterns, the Nike swoop, Bear, Tylenol, all these little things, that little bitty pill-like looking thing that's part of Bear's logo. Bear in its name also is a trademark. So those are trademarked individually as an icon and a logo, as well as a name. So a use of a name can be protected through various trademarks. And there's been other people that have tried to trademark things that weren't, because of the word itself. In fact, Microsoft tried to trademark the word Windows, but that's unfortunately such a widely and globally used word for things that are actually Windows, that they could not get the trademark on those terms. So not every term that you think you want to lock down, you're even able to do so. So when you go for trademarks, you have to make sure that you're not doing anything that's same or similar with a patent search, similar to what we talked about with Christine with regulatory. You can't be doing something that someone else is doing and then expect to trademark that. So any kind of slogan, any kind of identity brand, even you personally, your own identity is protectable and can be trademarked. So it's one of those things, unique things where it's something that represents something else that we're actually trying to trademark here and protect. So that's trademarks. Copyrights, it's similar, but not in the way you might think. This is all talking about kind of non-tangible things that would be related to a set of code or a set of technologies that represent some sort of content or words or anything else that make up something else. So literary works like books, novels, those are all intellectual property, and they can all be copyrighted. Lines of code, you can copyright software. In fact, most software is copyrighted, where you copyright the actual lines of code. Songs, movies, pictures, selfies are actually intellectual property. In fact, just slightly weird but pertinent conversation here. If you were to use my phone to take a picture of something, whatever that picture was is actually owned by you. So the intellectual property is not tied to my phone. It's tied to you as a creator. There was a very famous situation that happened about 2 years ago with Ellen DeGeneres, where she took, I believe, Bradley Cooper's phone. That's about as much as I care about who, and took a big, huge, ussy of a bunch of people, a selfie. And there was actually a conversation about who owned the intellectual property. Well, Ellen DeGeneres took Bradley Cooper's phone and took a picture, and Ellen DeGeneres actually owned that picture, even though it was created on his phone. She was the creator. She was the one that captured the content that made up that picture. So that's a kind of weird and almost silly example, but it is a perfect example of the person who creates it is the person who owns the intellectual property. But if you don't protect it, that intellectual property can be stolen and infringed upon, giving you no course of action to go back and mitigate risk and receive rewards and compensation for loss and anything like that. So even though you may own it, if you don't copyright it, it's up for grabs in most cases. patents. I mean, that's a big thing that we're talking about these days, and something pretty important to this conversation. These are government issue property rights given around an invention or some sort of new product, device, process, application. There's a variety of different things that it can be, but it's given to someone who owns that property. But in relation to that property, the IP itself must be disclosed to the public as a condition of that protection. So even though you have a patent, you can't just lock it away in a vault somewhere and say, this is my patent and no one has it. But if someone happens to invent the same thing I did, I can pull my patent out of my safe and go sue them for millions of dollars. That's just not the case. When you apply for a patent, you're agreeing to disclose every bit of your intellectual property that's included in that patent to an open market. Now, what comes with that is the protection of the patent, though. So when you have a patent, that means that no one can claim the invention of that product. In fact, they can't claim the invention of that product forever, although you're not protected forever. Once you've filed the invention and gotten your patent approved through a process, now you own that patent and you are the inventor of that technology or that piece of intellectual property. It does provide you protection in ways that no one can come in and come over and say, we're going to create those things. But I have seen situations, and there are cases, and there's a growing interest in this space about who actually is doing things with patents. So there's these, patent trolls that will go and create several patents, hold on to those patents, and just wait for someone to come around and start inventing on those things, either through knowledge that it was a patent and they just don't care, or not having knowledge that it was already patented and caring about that. But if you're going to be a company that's going to venture into a technology and spend millions and millions of dollars, and you're going against someone who merely filed the patent, which is important, but not when it comes to doing anything with it, it's looking more and more in the favor of the people doing something with the technology, as opposed to doing something that are just holding on to the technologies. But that's not tried and true, and that's not in every case. So it's still the best protection for your technology and intellectual property. One thing else to note, that the rules changed not so long ago, that it's no longer first to invent, it's now first to file. So if Shelby and I, not knowing each other, created the same technology in our heads or as a prototype, and then we go seek a patent for that, and she did it 2 months before I did, and she can document that, but I filed first, then I'm going to get the patent and she is not, even if she could prove that she invented it before me. So that's a very important thing when it comes to filing for patents, is it's first to claim and file, not first to invent. With the patents, there's a few different types. There's design patents, and that's something new or original or ornamental in design for an article or manufacturer. They're good for 14 years. Most patents these days are utility patents. That's some sort of process or machine or article manufacturer or composition of matter, and those are good for 20 years. And then there's even a classification for wildlife and fauna, or specifically plants, any distinct and new variety of plant, and that's good for 20 years as well. And the reason being is that intellectual property generally comes with someone naming it after something, and they protect that and lock it away. So it has some distinct value based on the naming and the discovery of that plant. And those patents are good for 20 years. Now, what happens after that 20 years? It's a free-for-all. We've seen this in many times related to the pharmaceutical industry, when a company will have a patent on it for a set period of time, and then afterwards, that patent's over. That's when all the generics can be formulated and sold in the open market, making for a less competitive space for the inventor, but it certainly opens up the marketplace in general for consumers to have a variety of choices to choose from, which is also leads to competitive pricing, which is a good thing for the general population and consumers around the world. So patents sometimes can really kind of mess with the general population and not give you the access you want, because they hold the patent. They're going to try to make as much money as they possibly can in the 20 years that they have before everybody starts to eat their pie. So they have a big piece of a small pie, and then they're like everyone else after the patent's over and having a small piece of a big pie. Okay, the next one I told you I explained, but I think you'll see these examples and figure it out pretty easily. But trade dress, these are visual appearances, characteristics, overall look and feel. So that Tiffany's blue box that we've seen in movies time and time again, that's actually trade dress owned by Tiffany's and Co. The goldfish baked crackers, that shape, that distinct and unique shape, that's protected as trade dress and trade information for the manufacturer of goldfish. John Deere's signature green and yellow tractors, those are all part of intellectual property that they protect as part of their trade dress. And they get trademarks and different things to protect those. So you've seen several examples. Again, you could probably look around your room right now and find even more. FedEx's signature purple and orange is definitely one as well. And then there's trade secrets. These are things that you hold in high confidence. You might not be able to protect those, but you need to do whatever you possibly can to keep those protected. A lot of times you will share this information and utilize the term confidential and proprietary. You'll share that information with third parties. You'll share that information with your counsel and attorneys and a variety of different employees, your salespeople. And you have to classify those as being trade secrets to your company in case of an example as such, where a salesperson who has access to your price list, access to your client list, decides to go to another company because they gave them or her a much higher salary. They can't just take their client list or the client list, the company's client list and the company's price list with them to the new company. This happened to just a case 2 or 3 years ago with FedEx and UPS, where a salesman went from one to the other and took the price sheet with them, and one company wound up suing the other company and the individual for infringement of trade secrets and sharing information. So, it can be something that is litigated civilly, and in some cases, I'm sure probably even criminally. But certainly it's something that you have to do as much as you can to try to protect these things, and utilizing words like proprietary and confidential, being very diligent about who you share information with, are all part of protecting your trade secrets. So I do have a question down there at the bottom. You've probably all heard of the letters NDA or MNDA, a non-disclosure agreement. This is certainly one way to protect trade secrets. Shelby and I both have probably the same ideas around this, just because we've come from the same kind of space. That NDAs a lot of times are completely ineffective. They don't protect you in ways that you think they do. In most cases, it's because they're difficult to litigate. It is not very often that an NDA, unless there was significant damage incurred by one party, the plaintiff in this regard, if there was significant damages that can be measurable and documented, that can be presented in a court of law, then an NDA may be able to be litigated successfully. If you were to say to me, I want you to sign an NDA before I tell you anything about my business, in general, I will say, have a good day and good luck on your business. Reason being is, I can't help you very much if if you're telling me, but you're restricting my ability to talk to anyone else about what you're doing. And when I sign an NDA, I'm legally binding myself to not say anything. And therefore the NDA has to be made null and void in order for me to help you out, right? So one of these things is to be of an awareness that sharing information carefully is a good thing. Sharing it just publicly without care or concern about protecting your property can be a bad thing. When you're talking to people that can help you, customers, mentors, teachers, venture capitalists, banking institutions, these are people that you should share some details of your intellectual property with, and others, all of your intellectual property with. In fact, in due diligence with venture capitalists, you'll have to share it all, but you will have some agreements between you for protection. But in general, you should look at NDAs and use them sparingly. Because once again, unless you can prove a significant amount of loss incurred by the release of confidential information by one party from the other, they'll be difficult to litigate. So anyway, in some ways, NDAs can actually get in your way. If you ever need advice about NDAs and what they're utilized for and when to best utilize those, just reach out to me. We have we have lots of resources that can substantiate what I'm talking about here. Okay, before I move on to value propositions, does anybody have any questions? Brad, your hand's up. Do you have a phone?
I did,
Yeah,
Brian.
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So the first question I had, I guess, is the classic question every startup asks themselves, if it's applicable, I guess, is do you file the provisional or do you keep it a trade secret? And what do you have some guidelines you stick to, or is there like a rule book you have? What are your thoughts?
I don't think there's no rule book. No, there's no answer to that question that is going to be so tried and true and so absolute that it could be said as the best answer or the most likely answer. I mean, it depends on it depends a lot on your research. I mean, we talk about discovery a lot, and that's an important word. You have to do enough research where you can also make a logical assessment of what you need to do from a intellectual property protection perspective. Once again, you're putting this out in public domain, even when it's in its pending state, to a certain extent. At a certain point, it becomes public. And if you want to be able to say patent pending, or provisional patent pending, you've already decided your stuff is out there to be discovered. So you just kind of need to figure out what the right timing it is. And in some cases you don't. I mean, Elon Musk is not patenting everything he's creating. Some things he is opening up. Right. Some things and many things he's opening up for the sole reason that he wants to create industries. He wants to create marketplaces around this technology for him to be the biggest and first beneficiary of that situation, because he's creating the technology firsthand. And also other developers can make platforms significantly better by opening things up. So some things you might create that are revolutionary, but they're so revolutionary, the money to be made is by opening up the environment as opposed to protecting it and keeping it very isolated and sequestered. So it's a scenario based decision that has to be made based off the industry, the product, the team, the timing, launch schedules, FDA approvals, where are you on the 510 process, so on and so forth.
Right. So I guess the answer is always, it depends.
It depends. It really does. But the earlier you engage the patent attorney and the earlier you engage subject matter experts that know this, like MRC Global, if you're going into regulatory, the earlier they can help you decide when that's the case. In some cases, they'll say, let's get started right now. In many cases, they say, okay, well, let's do more building first. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah. Isn't there some kind of secret like back door that you can, like, I've heard this before, where you can submit the provisional, but do something with the U.S. Patent Office where it gets unpublished and you pull it back if you decide you want to keep it a trade secret. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, you can always pull it back. I mean, you can keep. I mean, it stays in a proprietary state until they've done their research, and the patent attorneys that actually work for the USPTO, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, have done their due diligence to find if there's any similar or same things out there. And then they'll say your patent is approved, but you can always back out before the actual patent is closed and you are given your patent
public.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's something you can do if you decide to do. You can also forfeit your quote unquote lifetime patent. You can take it off the patent list and open it up to the entire world. So nothing's stopping you from taking it down 2 years after you've done it in your 20-year lifetime.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It's good questions, Bob.
So second question was on the NDAs, if you have time, or
what time is it? You got time for one more?
Yeah, it was around NDAs and investors. I've always heard like you should be cautious, but also to Shelby's point that she's saying it hinders the creative process, collaboration. It's almost like a how dare you, like I thought we were friends. Why are you giving this an NDA kind of thing or conversation, and like, you know, how do you handle that?
Well, I mean, I look at it pretty simply. The likelihood, probability of that person taking my intellectual property and doing something with it. Venture capitalists, good ones, They don't start businesses.
Yeah.
They invest in businesses. They buy businesses. They sell businesses. They don't go, well, that's such a great idea, I'm going to take it for myself. That, first of all, you will lose your reputation as being a high quality VC when you do that. Second of all, it's just not something that happens on even a any kind of frequent basis. It's very, very rare. I've never heard of it, to be honest. So it just doesn't happen that often because that's not their job. Now, if you're going to take a competitive product, a new hand phone set that's revolutionary, and walk into Apple and ask Apple to look at your thing and not steal anything from you, you'd be sadly mistaken, right? You know, I mean, that's you walking into the lion's den and questioning why you got your hand bit off by the lion. So, I mean, there's people to talk to and there's people not to talk to. A lot of times it's a judgment. Venture capitalists probably won't sign NDAs with you, at least initially, not until they decide to go with a term sheet, and the term sheet kind of discusses that situation. So it overrules an NDA. But they would, if you go and ask a VC to sign an NDA before you share with them, you'll get the quickest no that you've ever heard. No, thank you. Right. And they'll just walk away. A large percentage of them will, most exclusively. So it just doesn't happen to a VC. So that's not that's not something I would even push with a VC.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. No problem. Okay. I don't see any other hands up. I'm going to move on to value propositions with the last 11 minutes of our time tonight, because I do want to close out by talking about homework and some more about last week's assignment and how it affects this week's homework and the Canvas itself.
Hey, Brian. Pankaj asked, how do NDAs hinder the creative process? But I think you kind of answered that.
Okay.
Can they just confirm that their question was answered? They typed it in the chat if they're still on here. Let's see. Oh, yes. Okay, great. She said yes. Thanks.
Okay, good.
All right.
Good. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll open up the chat window too. Okay. Good. So all the questions, and obviously we've said this before, if you have any more questions afterwards, you think of it later, just send it off an email. We'll fire back a response as soon as we can. Okay, so value proposition discovery. This is the next phase. So we've discussed problem statements, we've discussed customers, we've discussed solution statements. We've actually done homework in that regard, and making sure, and we've talked about this, and you've heard me stress this several times, that having problem, customer, and solution locked in with each other is critical and required before you move into going into any of the other blocks in the canvas, specifically around value proposition and discovery of value proposition. So let's just jump right in and I'll tell you why that is the case. Okay, so what is my benefit from using your solution? Okay, and I told you I'm gonna use this image in every deck the entire session. That's me wondering, what is the benefit of using your solution? Value propositions are just that. They're the benefits to the customer that they will derive, glean, take, receive, whatever it is, from utilizing your product, utilizing your solution. This is why they pay you what they pay you for that product, is because they found your product to have one or more benefits to them that outweigh other competitors in that space. It's that simple. And in that simplicity is the importance of understanding value proposition. And how are you going to understand value proposition if you don't have a solution and a solution statement that matches to a properly formatted and framed problem, and at least an assumption of an identified customer to talk to get information about what they'll benefit from utilizing your solution? So you can see that you really can't get an informed value proposition until you figured out what you're trying to solve, with what you're trying to solve it with, and who has the problem that needs a solution. Because they're the only ones that are going to be able to tell you the value that you're looking for, that they're looking for. So customer needs identification is the first step in the value setting process. And that comes off the information that you discovered during customer discovery. So in the early stages of customer discovery and through the process that we've talked about so far, your focus is trying to validate your hypothesis on what the problem is, and then further validate and experiment and observe and interview people and gather data and information on the solution, how well it matches the problem all along the way, validating the customer to make sure that those assumptions were challenged and your hypothesis tested and your theories proven or disproven towards whatever end state you want from a product or service that you're going to launch into the market space. So in order to do that, you need to understand what the customer's perspective is, and that customer discovery is going to allow you to start drafting a list of value propositions. So going back and looking at your information that you got during the customer discovery phase, you will be able to pick up keywords that are value statements. It is about pain and gain, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. What pains a customer and what can be gained by utilizing your solution. We're going to talk about that in the next slide and a few slides from there. So customer needs, what does each type of customer need from your solution? That's important. I highlighted it. Each. Some of you have multiple customers. They're not going to have the same value propositions because they're not the same type of customer utilizing the same product. So insurance companies and different things that are providing some sort of FDA approved device, they're going to have different expectations from the vendor and the manufacturer than they would from someone else. And the manufacturer and vendor of that product is going to have different expectations for the end user as well, regardless if they ever have contact with that person or not. They need to understand what the benefits are so they understand the value from each perspective of each customer type. And that's why we build personas for all the various different customer types so we can go through this process. What is the job that needs to be performed by your solution on behalf of the customer? What is the product's intent and what will it be doing for the customer? And then I talked about this a second. What are the specific pains and gains experienced by the customer based on the problem at hand? What is their pain point and how painful is it? And then what will be gained and how great will it be? How much value will it add by gaining that from gaining something by utilizing your product? So how much pain and how much gain? That's what the words we utilize in this industry and with our colleagues to talk about the various different areas that could be valuable to a customer. In general, performance features alone will not be a great benefit to the customer, not exclusively at least. You know, I can do it faster than my competitor. Okay, how much faster? If it's 5 times faster, yes, I might buy your product exclusively for performance. If it's 10% faster, look, I've already got this product. It's okay. It's doing everything I need it to do. I'm not willing to spend the extra time, money, or energy buying something that's only 10% better. So going out there and saying we do it better, we perform better. And I did see some of these statements in your solution statement of doing it better than the competition. That is not a value. That is not a benefit. And therefore it's not a value proposition. Doing it better is just not the case. How you're doing it better is more likely to give you the value than just the fact that you are. Okay, so don't utilize performance or spending performance in some sort of marketing way that's going to make you think you're going to get a lot of customers just based on that value alone. Okay, feature to value matching. That's what we're talking about. So going back into the solution and looking at the various features that your solution provides will help you understand what values they're aligned to. So in the case of the mat for the infants, the wedges for the infants, the tummy time concept, you know, these are there are features there that allow the baby to lay at a slightly inclined state. That's a feature, and the feature, why it's a feature is because at a slightly inclined state, studies show blah, 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 ... right? That's the value that you're adding compared to a feature. So looking at what your solution has to offer and then mapping those against values will allow you to be creative around what you are going to price that at, right? So if I have a feature and it's aligned with a value and I know how much pain it causes and I know how much positive gain it's going to provide, I can assign a dollar value for that value. I can also validate that by asking the customer that question. If I were to give you this solution today and it alleviated these 3 pains that you've identified and it gave you these 2 gains that you've also identified, what would you be willing to pay? It's a question I've asked more times than I can count during my customer discovery phase, merely to validate both the feature to the value benefit that they're going to receive and how much pain is in their pocketbook to cure that pain and get that gain, right? So that's information that's going to allow you to even price your values to these customers. So, each customer identified as a target customer, it needs to go through this process. You do this for all of them, not one set per persona. Avoid using competitive advantages as a benefit. Again, I do it better than they do, or I'm closer to you. These are not necessarily the actual benefits that they're going to receive. It's the ones where they have the product in hand, or they're utilizing the product in their home, regardless of how long it took there. Those are the long-standing value propositions that you need to understand and address, and then properly price for you to make revenue and profit. Okay, test, validate. Once you've got some assumptions, once you've got some data, once you've included some information to help you set the value proposition, you need to test that. You need to validate those with your customers. You need to validate that against your existing information that you have. Your value propositions will inform things downstream too. So once you're looking at the value proposition, this is also a good time to look at the competitive space to see where you do match up with your competitors' features and values. Trust me, I'm about to make one statement that'll make that very easy for you. And then you need to start working down the rest of the canvas now that you have the value propositions, because you're able to match your values and your features one for one against your competitors. You know exactly what you're going to deliver in your minimum viable product, because these are the ones that were identified as being the most painful or the most gainful. And then you're going to start looking at obstacles to bringing it to market. I've already talked about cost and revenue. And so all these other blocks are directly informed by the the value proposition that you've identified here. So everything will inform that. And then the one thing I was going to add, the most important thing, it's going to inform your marketing and sales narratives. Once you've found out what the value proposition is from your customers, you better believe that that's going to be the thing that drives your marketing concepts and your marketing campaigns, because you're going to want to draw a lot of attention to a much larger customer base of those same values that you validated against a much smaller early adopter customer base in order to reach that main mass market of the rest of the population, the 80% of the population that you want to sell into. So marketing and sales, which leads me to what I was saying earlier, because it's part of your marketing and sales narrative, guess what? Then it's also going to be part of your competitors' marketing and sales narrative. So looking those up, looking at their marketing materials very diligently and detail wise to see exactly what words you're utilizing can be very important. And that's not infringement by just looking at their marketing and utilizing some messaging along the same lines, unless you absolute copy their taglines, marks, and stuff like that. So, and the Tiffany's blue box, just don't do that. Okay, so here's another canvas. This one, I like it so much, I didn't even change it. It's from a company called Strategizer. They provide a couple of different canvases. They started off early in this space. This is their value proposition canvas. They actually have a whole book. I have it. It's pretty good. And it talks about this tool is directly made for getting to that value proposition, right? Understanding what those value propositions are. So looking at this canvas, it's even more simple than the other one is, but things we've just talked about, terms we've used, are a part of this canvas. Now, with other canvases, I'm not sure why they put it left to right, because I always utilize it from right to left by first understanding as much as I can about what the gains and pains are of what my customers are. So I start trying to identify those areas based off the personas I have. So I'll take a persona and I'll start getting more information if I need to talk to more customers, or I'll start getting into my information I already gathered from customer discovery, and I'll start jotting down notes that are either pains or gains. They're pretty simple. One's positive, one's negative. And then I also detail my products and services just to make sure I have all my features down, my main delivery of services for my product or service. And then I go back and I jump back and forth and I go, okay, is it going to match the job that the customer needs? Is it going to equal that job? And so if I can match up and understand what the gains and pains are for my customer, what my solution is, and in a blanket statement, yes, it does do the job, then I go back to my left section there and I start doing the things that will create gains and the things that will relieve pain. So what can you offer your customer from your product that's going to achieve them their positive outcomes that they're looking for? So I jump back and forth, just filling out these things. You might find your own way of filling this out, but as you can see, it's a very good, easy, concise way of jotting down the things we just talked about, pains, gains, and getting the job done for the customer. So this is a good tool for you to utilize when you're talking about the value proposition, which leads me to your homework. So we have a problem statement. We have a solution, a customer persona, at least one for each of y'all. We have a solution statement that matches up with the other two components. So now it's time to build a value proposition canvas. I've included the canvas in a folder in the Google Drive called, I think it's called Tools. And so Canvas Tools, I think it's what it's called. So look in there, there's two canvases in there. There's the idea discovery canvas for your reference. And then now there is a value proposition canvas in there for you to print out and utilize with your teams. So for next week, same thing goes. By next Tuesday, I'd like to see a value proposition canvas. If you want to print it out, write it down in hand, and then scan it or take a picture of it and send it to me, you can. If you want to use a PDF tool to write directly on the PDF as well, however you want to send it to me, that's great. Send it to me and Shelby as well. In fact, actually send it to us, but also upload it into the Google Drive, because I've also created a Google Drive folder called Team Folders. And inside that team folder, each of you have a team folder there, team 1 through team 6. So go ahead and load it into there. Let us know it's there, or send it to us also. I will be going on that Google Drive and editing directly in the Google platform. So when adding comments, so they'll all be there. So when you go back and look at that same document, you'll see my comments for you to make changes to. And then if you make updates based on my comments, send me another heads up saying, hey, I made some updates. Go check it out, and I will do that. For those that are still working on their problems and solutions and personas, get those wrapped up by Tuesday as well. Let me know about this new canvas by Tuesday, end of day. Wednesday, I'll take a look at it. Thursday morning, I'll take a look at it and give you feedback. And then we'll go into next week's session talking about this a little bit, and then also talking about financing and some other topics. So that's it for tonight as far as that goes. Does anybody have any questions about the assignments from last week, this week, and moving into next week, or any topics we discussed tonight? Let's see, anybody raising their hands? Anybody taking themselves off mic or off mute? Going once? All right. Well, it was a great session. I really appreciated MRC and Christine jumping on. I hope that you found that valuable. It was a great presentation. It's something that's very valuable to me to understand as well and keep abreast of that situation. She represents something else, that she is a subject matter expert. So it's always good to understand who those are, so you can reach out to those individuals when you need to. So be sure to reach out to Shelby, myself, Ryan, Erica, and we can give you Christine's information as well at MRC, and they specialize in doing what they told you tonight. So if you're ready to move down that regulatory path, that path to 510 approval, we've got your people for you. All right, thanks everybody. If you got any questions after we get off, please feel free to send me and Shelby an email. All right, take care.